All right, good morning, class. Now that we've figured out this whole distance learning thing, today is going to be an actual lesson presented through these notes. So if you see attached, you have a note reflection worksheet. That's your deliverable for the day. You can fill that worksheet out by listening to this PowerPoint, but you might also need to do the reading for the pages of that day. Please give me feedback if this is too much work to do within 1 day period, and if so, we'll alter things moving forward. But our goal for today is we're going to look at the different theories of emotion. Where do they come from? What exactly are they? And how do psychologists go about studying them? All right. If we were going to define emotions from a psychological standpoint, it says it's a combination of 3 different factors. 1, your body needs to become physically aroused, needs to start doing something. 2, you're going to start expressing that behavior, and so your actions, your facial expressions, all of those will change. And then 3, your conscious experiences are also altered. The way you think about and perceive the world will change. So for example, if I am angry, all right, well, usually when people are angry, first, their body will start having their heart race a little bit more, their muscles will tense up a little bit. Expressing my anger, my face will become a little scrunched, your eyebrows turn down, you might grit your teeth a little bit more. You tend to puff up your chest so you stand a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. Maybe I start punching things, who knows? And for 3, conscious experiences, I might see other people as more of a threat, more antagonistic. And so these 3 things would create that emotion of anger within me. Now, there are emotions that are biologically driven, but how we choose to express them are dictated by our culture. And so we'll go over the expressions of emotions next class, but today we're going to look at how do we understand where do they come from. So one of the first theories behind emotional theories and where they come from is the James Lange theory. Most people assume that I am angry and therefore my body starts changing. So something made me upset and then I think about it and now my body's going to respond with anger, and that is why my body is having the racing heart. Well, James actually thinks it's the other way. Our bodies have evolved for emotional expressions because it helps give meaning and understanding to life. And so the reason why I feel anger isn't because my external environment, it's because of my internal body reactions. My heart is racing and I'm punchy things, so now I feel anger. And so it's a body first, expression second type of direction that we go through. Right? So here would be an example of that. Right? Fear is usually something that we don't recognize until after our body has started responding. And so our awareness of the emotion only comes after we're aware of our physical responses and what's going on. Your book gives an example of a car that crashes, and I have a personal story that illustrates that also. I had just graduated from college, packed up my entire dorm into an old green minivan. I'm driving home from West Virginia over these like windy roads. It's been raining, so the roads are all slick. And I guess I come over at top of the hill a little too fast, and all of a sudden my minivan starts hydroplaning. I start spinning around in the middle of the highway, and I come to a stop on the shoulder, facing the wrong direction and all of the oncoming traffic. Obviously, scared, but I got through that entire situation, actually called my mom to explain why I was now going to be late, and asked, I don't know what to do now. And when she asked me, Colleen, are you okay? Are you all right? I recognized, oh, my finger is actually very white as I grip the steering wheel, and my heart is beating out of my chest at that moment. Right? Elements of like shock or intense fear and anger. Right? We usually don't recognize these emotions until after our body has responded to that threat. A lot of times we feel anxious and uneasy, even though we might not have a reason in our environment to give us that tiny fear response. And so James Lange would state the reason why we feel anxious, the reason why we feel scared, why we feel angry, is because our body is responding to something from our environment that we've evolved to get to that state. If you change your body, then that will also change the way your body physically responds and therefore the emotion that you feel. All right, so for example, if you have a pencil handy, take that pencil and I want you to put it in the mouth, holding it between your teeth in the back of your molars. Right, you're kind of making a smile right now, right? Or a weird grimace face. Right, now take the pencil and now I want you to hold it in your mouth in the front using just kind of like your front teeth or your lips to hold it in place. Right now you're kind of making a frown expression. Well, theorists have tested James Lange theory by having people watch a video clip by holding pencils in their mouth, either by fake smiling or fake frowning. And what they found is that their emotional connection to that clip, thinking it was funny or thinking it was bad, was kind of based off of the facial expression that they were making. So there is good experimental evidence showing that maybe our feelings do come from our body experiences, and then we get the conscious experience of the emotion. Right? However, there are a lot of emotions that have very similar body reactions. Right? When you're scared, your heart races a little bit more, your palms get a little bit sweaty, you have butterflies in your stomach. Okay. Well, that's the exact same emotions you feel when you fall in love, what we talked about in our last unit, when the passionate love examples. Same thing. When you're scared, your heart beats a little bit more, your muscles get a little bit tense. The same thing that physically happens when you're angry. Right, so we have these very different emotional responses to very similar bodily reactions. And so while physiology does play a big role in emotion, it can't be the only reason behind these emotions that we're feeling. So another theory, it could be the Cannon-Bard theory. Right. This one says your body physically responds and you label that response instantaneously at the exact same time. Right. There might not be an awareness of that label at the time. So like me spinning around in my car, I might not have been labeling that consciously, oh, this is scary, but clearly that's what I defined it as. Right. For example, do you like riding roller coasters? Right? There are people who love them and there are people who hate them. Right? If I was just going to look at their physical responses, the terrified people on the roller coaster and the excited people on the roller coaster are physically doing the same thing, but they label those bodily responses differently. They're a subjective experience to that action of riding the roller coaster, gives them the excitement or the fear instantaneously, automatically. And so there is this subjective labeling that goes on unconsciously that happens automatically when your body starts responding. And so there's no delay between body and then emotion. Cannon-Bard says body and emotion happen instantaneously at the exact same time. Right, so to look at this, we've actually used studies on individuals experiencing varying levels of paralysis. Right, individuals paralyzed from the waist down, they still have physical responses to all their respiratory systems, where a lot of our emotional physical responses are. The racing heart, the increased breathing, pulse rate, all of that. Versus individuals who've been paralyzed from the neck down, they have all the conscious labeling experiences, but their body physical reactions are a lot lower. They don't have the same respiratory reactions. So they've shown individuals of different levels of paralysis video clips of cerebral emotional triggering movies versus physical emotionally triggering movies. For example, sadness, that tends to be pretty cerebral. You think about why you're sad, and most of the physical expressions come straight from your face, the crying of the tear ducts, those type of things. Versus anger, that tends to be more respiratory based, and so it tends to be more of a physical response. So even though I can think of things that make me angry, it tends to come more from the body to feel that anger. And so what they found is when they watched video clips, individuals with neck down paralysis didn't respond to action movies or horror movies, but they responded a lot to drama films. They had intense sadness, were much more likely to cry and openly weep at the sad moments. Versus individuals that had paralysis from the waist down where their body is still physically responding, they were able to feel more intense anger and fear, where they weren't as caught up within the moment of the drama films and the sad clips within those scenes. And so we can use this to support Ken and Bard because they both could consciously label, oh, this is a sad film, this is an angry film, but their ability to actually feel that emotion was contingent upon having the emotional reactions. And so when they said sad, those with the neck down paralysis used more intense sad words, and they had a more intense physical reaction. So that might be why they could consciously experience it a little bit more. Right. Most researchers will agree with Ken and Bard. We do need to have experience of emotions that have some cognitive element involving. Right. Your physical responses can't be the main basis behind it. Right? How we interpret those events, that leads into our conscious experiences of why we feel scared. So if you were out walking down the streets right now, if you were by yourself versus if you're in a group, seeing a strange man approaching you might be more or less scary depending on the situation. With all the information out about coronavirus, someone who is sneezing because of allergies, well, hearing that person sneeze now versus 2 weeks ago is a lot more anxiety producing, hearing somebody cough and things like that. And so how we decide to interpret the event might be very different. Has anyone ever stayed home alone by themselves at night? And you're going upstairs, you have to turn off all the lights by yourself. Has anyone ever convinced themselves that there's a ghost in the house or someone has broken into the house? Right? That home alone element, that conscious awareness, is kind of making you interpret your normal house-making noises at night as more scary, anxiety-producing than it necessarily is. So we do need some mental elements to help explain the physical reactions, and they come simultaneously. Right, the last theory is the Schachter two-factor theory. Ken and Bard and James Lang says body and emotion second, and so it's going in that direction where the body is always responding first, and then the conscious label happens simultaneously with it, or body, and then I know what the emotion is. But Schachter two-factor says it's almost a two-way street. My body responds, and then I get the emotion, or something in my situation makes me think about emotional experiences, and that then changes my body's reaction. And so it's not just body emotion, it's also emotion body. And so these two feed into each other. And the more I think about something, the more my body might intensify the physical responses, or the more intense my body physically responds, the more intense the emotional experience that I have. In our last unit, we talked about the chameleon effect and mood linkage. When we're around happy people, we feel happier. Right? Well, those environmental situations actually are giving us that emotional expression, which then changes the way that our body's responding and intensifies it. So we do know that your social environment can impact your emotional state, just as your body can impact your emotional state. And so the physical arousal and the cognitive labeling, they go back and forth. If I was going to talk about something that would make me angry, all right, well, maybe I'm in a really bad smelling room, maybe somebody personally insulted me, and so those social environmental influences have me feeling the anger emotion. Right? We talked about that in our aggression unit, or I could have somebody throw a chair at me, and that emotionally producing stimulus, my body's going to react by tensing up, the fight or flight instincts are going to kick in, and so now I'm going to feel that intense feeling of anger. Right? So they do agree that your emotion can grow from awareness of your body's arousal, just like James Lang theory stated, but it insists that there's a big social environmental influence as well. Right, so to do this, Schachter got a group of people who would willingly have people inject them with drugs just for a study. Right, they were injected with epinephrine, which is synthetic adrenaline. It gives you a boost of energy. Right, Half the people were told that you're getting adrenaline, it's going to make your heart rate just a little bit more, you're going to feel jittery. So they were told what the drug was going to do to them. The other half was not told what the drug was going to do to them. They just said, hey, we're going to inject you with this drug and then see what happens. It's safe, it's been tested, you will not die, but please can we inject you? And they found people willing to do this for some reason. So they were all given these injections of epinephrine, and they were put in a room with either another person pretending to be really excited and happy, or someone who was really angry and irritated. Those that were told what the drug was going to do to their body, they never experienced mood linkage. They never caught the emotional expressions of the person who they were with. Right? They attributed all those physical reactions to the drug and not to any emotional state that they were having. So because of their conscious experiences, they were able to deflect the experiences of intense irritability or intense elation. Right? But my participants who didn't know what the drug was going to do to them, well, in their sense, they did pick up and experience that intense mood linkage. If they were around the really happy person, they also became really happy and excited. And if they were around the really irritated, angry person, they also became really irritated and angry. Right? So those physical responses, since they couldn't cognitively explain where it was coming from, they explained it by, I must be feeling this emotion. And so those social situations played a much bigger role in how they labeled and experienced those physical reactions. Right, so all of these theories, they do place a lot of emphasis on our body and what's happening. We've evolved to have these physical reactions, and so therefore we have to look at the neural pathways within our brain. Right? We know that our cerebral cortex, those upper level wrinkly parts of the brain, allow us to think ourselves into the emotions. All right, Schachter two-factor theory only works because of these thinking elements, our understanding of the environment and the stimuli. Right? But we also have our basic primitive instincts. Right, for James Lang, for Canembard, we need to have that fear response coming from our amygdala, our fight or flight center. And so we have these things known as microexpressions. Our face actually responds to minor stimuli in the environment that make us happy or make us sad. People who are really good poker players, they can read these micro expressions, these minor tells in other players to know if they're bluffing or if they have a bad hand or if they got a really good hand and they're trying to hide it. And so we have these automatic responses to our environment that trigger from either our basic amygdala giving you those micro expressions on the face, or that instinctive fear anxiety when we're in an altered environment where we might perceive some sort of threats, right? But our brain allows us to understand what's the reality of that, right? Me staying at home at night, I know ghosts don't exist. We can argue about this when we're back in school for those of you who think that ghosts exist, right? So even though I might feel like there is some spirit in the house, my cerebral cortex, my cognitive labeling will be able to rationalize, nope, this is just me being silly and being scared. The threats are not real. And so you need the amygdala to give those basic instinctual responses, but you also need that cerebral cortex to kind of defray any of those anxieties. All right, so the amygdala and the cortex, they work together. From our therapy unit, all right, how do lobotomies work? Well, in order to cut down on the aggressive nature of some of our patients, if we severed the pathways between the amygdala and their cerebral cortex, they weren't angry anymore. And so the amygdala will send all this basic information up to the cerebral cortex so we can think about it and make the appropriate responses. If you don't have that connection, then you don't have a strong emotional reaction and your emotions are altered. Our psychopaths that we learned about in our disorder unit, right? They didn't have a fully developed frontal lobe, and so therefore they didn't have a good kind of expression of emotions. So they couldn't feel empathy, they couldn't feel sadness, they couldn't have those complex emotions. They were just relying on their basic emotional instincts of anger and fear because the amygdala element was still intact. right? These complex emotions, they need to have the cerebral cortex intact. And so we can think ourselves into knowing if I love you or not by understanding my communication styles, the similarities that we have in common, right? My only ability to feel guilty is if I can think about why I should feel bad or feel okay with this, why I should feel shame for what I've done or not. Right? These complex emotions, they come from our thought patterns, our upper level brain regions. We know that people are highly cerebral who get caught up in their heads and they, for better or worse, overthink situations. They're much more likely to have more intense emotional reactions. So again, in our anxiety unit, where we're looking at the different disorders, right? A lot of our patients with generalized anxiety disorders, with our phobias, well, they tend to have a lot of activity in that frontal lobe, that cerebral cortex, and they think about things a lot. So they interpret events as being more emotionally reactive than maybe they might be. I'm with my sisters and we've been binging Love is Blind while we've all been at home working together. And a lot of these contestants, they overthink the little tiny difficulties they have in the first few stages of their relationships, right? Versus other ones that tend to not overanalyze the situation. Their relationships might be a little bit more stable in these early days when there's a lot of stressors kind of coming at them. All right. We know from our social psychology unit that your emotional state can also be influenced by your environment, social facilitation. Our athletes perform better when they're in high anxiety situations. Right? That anxiety, that pressure, that stress actually triggers better physical responses from the swimmers at the Olympics, at the runners like Usain Bolt we talked about, or those pool players within those situations. Right? Our ability to perform well is contingent upon having a good emotional reaction. Right? But people that don't feel stress, people that don't feel those anxieties, they don't benefit from those social facilitation elements because they don't have those emotional pressures that help trigger the better performance from them. Right? Other emotions, boredom, we can't really look at those biological elements. We need to look more about the emotional expressions and the cultural experiences. Something that might make me embarrassed might be very different for somebody from maybe your generation or someone from another country, another culture. Things that trigger embarrassment is very different. Same things with boredom. I know a lot of people that are bored with this social distancing, self-quarantining at home, where others are so excited because I have this book that I've been wanting to read, this TV show that I want to watch, or just having that time alone. And so these individual experiences, these cultural experiences, they're just as significant as maybe the body physical responses. Right? A lot of our body responses are very similar. We've talked about anger, fear, and sexual desires all kind of being blended together. But even though our body is physically the same, our emotional expressions, we can feel fear, we can feel anger, we can feel these passionate connections very differently. And so a lot of that is created from our emotional environment and how we think about things and how we're taught to express things. And so we're going to get more into that next class when we go over everything. All right, so that is our notes for the day. Again, complete the reflection worksheet. If you're having trouble with any of the questions, make sure you read the pages in the textbook from the study guide, or come to the Zoom meetings. I'll be online. And I will have a new audio clip uploaded as soon as possible. Right, if there are no more questions, please email me or leave a comment. Have a good day.